What's the good word, y'all? DKB here. So, Zach Wilson, he has a lot of support in the middle of him being benched for some duration of this season, and it's coming from various sources: the coaching staff, the players, people outside of the organization, and this is coming from former legends in the NFL. Which is a huge thing to me. But prior to going into that, there was some things I wanted to break down kind of leading up to this. So, one of the things that I've loved, and is one of the few and only things since this whole issue came about, which really occurred after the post game press conference against the Patriots. Zach Wilson's most recent, kind of press response when he met with the media regarding him being benched and kind of his thoughts, feelings, etc. This is the guy I would have expected the whole time, right? He sounded like he understood um, the magnitude of kind of some of the things that he said, his actions, his on-field performance for sure, and that's the guy that I would have expected. Post-game press conference, that's the guy that I kind of was expecting this entire time. Um, Now, that's kind of where the positives end, right? One of the things that stood out to me was also in an interview from Zach Wilson. He quotes that he didn't really understand that there was an issue whatsoever until his dad texted him about it. And it's kind of finally hit me that it feels like Zach Wilson is kind of a boy amongst men at this point during his career, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The dude's young, 23, 24, something like that, from what I recall. He hasn't seen a whole lot of NFL football. He's been hurt. He didn't see a whole lot of college football. There's a lot of issues about him not having captain status at BYU. But he had the backing of a lot of people out there: Steve Young, Tony Romo, Chad Ochocinco's been a fan. The list goes on and on. Chris Sims being from the analytical side, one of his biggest supporters. And so, it's a little bit of a toss up, right? Which way do you want to lean? So, for me, this is really about watching this man come out here and mature. Now, that all aside, I'm very excited about, this very hypothetical situation. And we talked about it on the Jets Flight Squad podcast. And my boy Gunny Gumby from New York Situation Reports. Um, it came up, we were talking about Kurt Warner, and he mentioned that he was on Twitter tweeting about it. Kurt Warner actually got him a response. Super awesome. Basically, the conversation centered around my thoughts regarding our offensive coaching staff and how Greg Knapp has been a huge miss in what probably could have been a much more effective offense up until this point. You go back and take a look at it: Mike LaFleur, Rob Calabrese. You can look at Miles Austin. Ron Middleton's really the most experienced guy that we have on our roster, but nothing to really do with quarterbacks. And so you have to sit there and really think, well, who's really going to be able to maximize what we have in front of us? And you would have to default to Mike LaFleur here in terms of your comfort level. And, people generally aren't really highly excited about that either. So I think that's a huge thing that we need to go and grab. And Kurt Warner's response to him potentially having a position like a quarterback's coach or some kind of offensive assistant on the staff was that the Jets know where they can find me, as would any other team, and I think it'd be a huge plus. I just recently started seeing some of his analytical breakdowns, and he really does do a good job of simplifying a lot of these key aspects, minimizing a lot of the additional thinking that quarterbacks will have to do, at least just from what you hear as you go through these. So it's been awesome. But not only does Zach Wilson have Kurt Warner on his side, he also has Terry Bradshaw giving advice. He has Chris Sims again that's coming to his rescue. It's a lot of people out here that still think that Zach Wilson can get it done, and it's not 100% on him. Although they admit there's definitely shortcomings that he alone has to deal with. But then there's things like us limiting the playbook and stuff, and to a lot of that, I would really say, how much more faith can you put in a guy that can't complete screen passes? He can't complete even 90% of passes behind the offensive line or the line of scrimmage, either way. And so, I mean, yeah, you can go out there and keep drumming all of these things up and get inspired by the all plays that he'll eventually make at least generally one time per game. But I mean, it's not something that I would say people would want to follow behind consistently. So Terry Bradshaw's advice in regards to Zach Wilson, and keep in mind these are both guys, Kurt Warner and Terry Bradshaw, where they've gone through similar situations, if not much worse. So Terry Bradshaw's situation, multiple benchings, he comes back. We know what his career looks like. Same thing with Kurt Warner. We know about the playoffs. We know about the Super Bowls, the greatest show on turf. But a lot of people forget those humble beginnings. Undrafted in the league, he has to go out. I want to say it was the CFL he ends up going to, and then ultimately lands with the Rams. And so you're talking about guys that understand these mental hurdles that he's going through, especially early on in the career, and they can really kind of bridge that gap for him while getting him coached up, at least from Kurt Warner's perspective. But with Terry Bradshaw, he quoted that. He started becoming a quarterback and really started developing himself once he got that tough skin. And the word that he used to represent himself was nasty, although he says that's not an actual representation of who he is. Just kind of the mentality that he had to take in order to make sure he had a successful career in the NFL. And I think it's a very viable point when we take a look at Zach Wilson, especially this season. You see how he's answered a lot of these post-game press conferences or just responses to rumors that may have come up about how some of his teammates feel about him. It's very high schoolish in a way. And everything's kind of swept under the rug a bit. When it came to how he was performing on the field, he mentioned he didn't care about statistics. We never really got a firm understanding where Zach Wilson actually felt when it came to Elijah Moore. And, we're seeing a lot of evidence that from a bird's eye view is starting to pile up about how Zach Wilson maybe wasn't the best leader in the locker room, and how his production on the field, or lack thereof anyways, was actually impacting his team maybe more so than we thought. And one of the key quotes that keeps sticking out to me was from Elijah Moore, where he was asked how you feel your chemistry with Zach Wilson is, and he says, what chemistry? I don't get the ball. So regardless of him being in the doghouse, etc., this is 100% true. It's not like he was getting the most amount of targets when Joe Flacco was on the field, but still, he had those opportunities to go and make some plays, and there was arguments about how he was utilized and all of these other things. But yeah, ultimately moving forward, for one, Kurt Warner, I think, would be a huge addition to this coaching staff if we were able to make something like that happen. And this wouldn't be a move like us bringing his personal quarterback coach, John Beck, back onto the staff to try to get things going. Um, I ultimately am starting to feel like maybe that was a huge backfire on us, because at the time it didn't feel like coddling to me, although that's ultimately exactly what it is now when I kind of think back on it, 2020 vision. Zach Wilson was already mentally going through it. We were seeing things start to fall apart for him on the field. We had to get him somebody he felt comfortable with. And the fact that he maybe didn't have a guy like that on the team already was concerning. But regardless, we bring in John Beck. It was supposed to be a huge plus because then John Beck also knows how we want to operate our offense, some of the things that Zach Wilson really needs to hone in on and focus on. And so he should have an extremely strong offseason. And whether it was the injury that occurred during the preseason, although the handful of plays that he got before the MCL injury didn't give us any kind of indication that things were going to be great. And then we get these rumors that are coming out from all of these players, or at least sources suddenly, that a lot of people had concerns about the way Zach Wilson was performing and practicing there in the practice field way back during the OTAs. And maybe it just wasn't spoken about as highly as it is now, that we're progressing much quicker than I think even anybody in the building would have expected. So Kurt Warner, a great addition. Irregardless, I think there may be another video that I try to come up with, but it requires some heavy research on who some candidates may be that we can pull into this building, where there's previous players that want to get into coaching. And I'm not talking like a Jeff Saturday move. That's a whole other situation. But whether it's previous players that want to get into a move like that, or if it's somebody that is a bona fide, quarterbacks coach, somebody that's worked specifically with offenses to tell our game plans, whatever it is. Let's give him all the resources that he requires, and whether that's a demotion of Rob Calabrese, putting him in maybe some kind of different role, etc. We've seen that Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas can make the hard decisions in order for the good of the team as a whole. So I'm definitely expecting some changes moving forward as soon as the offseason ends. And we'll kind of see where the chips fall. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Can Zach Wilson ultimately bounce back? Are you completely done with him? But more so, I would definitely like to hear who you guys would maybe like to see us bring in on this offensive side of the staff to kind of replace what Greg Knapp should have been, and really get this team to start performing like it's a potential top 15 offense. I don't think that's asking for a lot, but looking forward to the comments. Appreciate the support as always, and I will catch you guys again. Peace.